Right now, somewhere within arm's reach, there is a small glass rectangle, and your hand already knows exactly where it is. You didn't choose to notice that. Your hand did. Sometime in the last few minutes, maybe the last few seconds, you reached for it, or thought about reaching for it, and you almost certainly don't remember the decision, because there wasn't one. In 2016, a research team at a company called D-Scout wired up 94 people and counted every single tap, swipe, and press they made on their phones, around the clock, for 5 days. The typical person touched their phone 2,617 times a day. The heaviest tenth of them, 5,427. Do the arithmetic across a year, and the average hand brushes that glass a couple of million times. The busy hands, several million. And it starts before you're even awake. In a survey of more than 7,000 Americans, 80% said they check the phone within 15 minutes of opening their eyes. 62% reach for it immediately, before the bathroom, before the person beside them, before the day itself. You know this. You've felt vaguely ashamed of it. You've promised yourself you'd stop, and you haven't. And you've quietly filed that away as one more small failure of will. I want to tell you something it took neuroscience 50 years to prove. It isn't weakness. It was never weakness. Because the thing in your hand is not really the problem. The problem, if it even is a problem, is far older than the phone, older than electricity, older than the wheel. It's a piece of software running in your skull that is roughly 300,000 years old, and it is doing its job perfectly. That is exactly why you can't put the phone down. This is the part most people find genuinely hard to believe the first time they hear it. That the pull you feel isn't a flaw in you, but a feature, an ancient survival instinct, behaving precisely the way it was built to behave. It just happens to be doing it inside a machine that was engineered deliberately by some very smart people to trigger that instinct over and over and over. To see how, we have to travel from a Las Vegas casino floor to a colony of seagull chicks on a windswept beach, and end up somewhere you might not expect. At the strange, almost gentle fact that for most of the time you're holding the phone, you aren't even enjoying it. Stay with that last one. It's the key that unlocks everything else. But the story doesn't start with the phone. It starts with hunger. For more than 300,000 years, that is the current best estimate for how long our species has existed, anchored by fossils unearthed at a site called Jebel Irhoud in Morocco, and dated by a team at the Max Planck Institute in 2017. For that entire stretch, your ancestors woke up every morning facing a single, relentless question. Where is the food? Not in a refrigerator, not on a shelf. Out there, scattered across a landscape, hidden in patches, never in the same place twice. To survive, the human brain had to become a foraging machine, an organ exquisitely tuned to go out into an uncertain world and find the calories and the company that kept you alive. That foraging brain is the one you're using to read this sentence. It has not changed. The world it was built for has vanished almost entirely, and nobody told the brain. Consider how good at this your ancestors had to be. Among the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer people in Tanzania whose way of life has been studied for decades by anthropologists at the University of Utah, even the children forage with a kind of unconscious economic genius. Researchers measured it. A Hadza child will walk past a nearer berry patch that yields around 960 calories an hour to reach a farther one that yields more than 2,200. Trading distance for richness, without a calculator, without being taught, because the brain that decides where to look for food comes preloaded with the math. Biologists have a name for that math. They call it optimal foraging theory, first formalized in 1966 by the ecologists Robert MacArthur and Eric Pianka. The rule is simple and merciless. Stay in a patch while it's paying out, and the instant its returns drop below what you'd get somewhere else, leave. Don't be loyal. Don't be sentimental. Move to the richer ground. For 300,000 years, that rule was about food. And then, in 1999, two researchers at Xerox PARC named Peter Paroli and Stuart Card noticed something uncomfortable. They were studying how people moved through information on this new thing called the web, and the behavior fit a familiar equation. People hunted for information exactly the way animals hunt for food. They followed what Paroli and Card called information scent. They stayed in a patch, a page, a feed, while it felt rich, and the moment it went dry, they left for somewhere with a stronger scent. They called it information foraging theory. The forager and the scroller, it turned out, run the same ancient program. Now hold that thought, because someone was about to build the richest, most bottomless berry patch in the history of the species, and put it in your pocket. But to weaponize a foraging brain, you first need to understand the one chemical that drives it, and almost everything you've been told about that chemical is wrong. You've heard of dopamine. You've probably heard it called the pleasure chemical, the little hit of happiness your brain squirts out when something good happens. That story is everywhere. It is also, as far as the actual science goes, false. In 1997, a neuroscientist named Wolfram Schultz published a study in the journal Science that quietly took the pleasure story apart. Schultz had been recording from individual dopamine neurons, watching them fire in real time. He expected them to light up when a reward arrived. At first, they did. But then something strange happened. Once the animal learned that a particular signal, a light, a tone, reliably predicted the reward, the dopamine neurons stopped firing for the reward itself. They fired for the signal, for the prediction, for the maybe. And here is the part that matters most. When the predicted reward then failed to show up, the dopamine didn't simply stay flat. It dropped. A measurable dip below baseline. The chemical signature of disappointment. Dopamine, Schultz showed, is not a measure of pleasure. It's a measure of surprise. It spikes hardest not when you get the reward, but in the uncertain moment before, when you might. It is the chemistry of anticipation, the engine that whispers, "Go look, it might be there." For a forager, it's the most useful signal in the world. It is the thing that gets you off the ground and out toward the patch. It is also, it turns out, terrifyingly easy to exploit. All you need is uncertainty. We have known how to manufacture that uncertainty for almost a century. In the 1950s, at Harvard, the psychologist B.F. Skinner ran a long series of experiments on what happens when you change the schedule on which a reward arrives. Give an animal a pellet for every press of a lever, and the behavior is steady but unremarkable. The animal works when hungry and rests when full. But give the pellet on a variable schedule, after an unpredictable number of presses, sometimes 3, sometimes 20, never a pattern you can learn. And something changes. The animal presses faster, longer, and with a stubbornness that is almost impossible to extinguish. Even after the pellets stop coming entirely, it keeps pressing and pressing. Skinner had found the single most compulsive reinforcement schedule that exists. It has a name, the variable ratio schedule. And if you've ever wondered why a slot machine feels the way it does, you already know what that schedule looks like in the wild. A slot machine is a variable ratio schedule with the lights turned up. It pays out unpredictably, just often enough, and the unpredictability is the entire point. It isn't the winning that hooks you, it's the maybe. There's one more piece, and it comes from a beach. In the late 1940s, a Dutch biologist named Nico Tinbergen sat among nesting seagulls and asked a deceptively simple question. What exactly triggers an animal's instincts? Herring gull chicks, he knew, peck at a red spot on their parent's beak to beg for food. So Tinbergen made fake beaks, and he found that the chicks would peck harder at a thin stick marked with exaggerated red stripes than at any real parent. That a cartoonish, over-colored imitation could fire the instinct more powerfully than the real thing ever could. He found it again and again. Ground-nesting birds offered a giant, garishly speckled plaster egg would abandon their own pale eggs and clamber onto the fake, trying to incubate a thing far too big to ever hatch. Tinbergen called these exaggerated triggers supernormal stimuli, artificial keys cut to fit an instinct's lock more snugly than nature ever made them. The bird isn't stupid. Its instinct is simply being counterfeited. Decades later, a Harvard psychologist named Deirdre Barrett picked up Tinbergen's idea and pointed it straight at us. In her 2010 book, Supernormal Stimuli, she argued that modern life is wall-to-wall fake eggs. Junk food is a supernormal stimulus for an instinct built to crave scarce fat and sugar. And the glowing, endless, personalized feed is a supernormal stimulus for a brain built to forage. Instincts and urges honed for hundreds of thousands of years to keep us alive in a world of scarcity, she wrote, are being subverted in the modern era of plenty. So now, assemble the machine. A foraging brain that follows information sent from patch to patch. a reward chemical that fires hardest on uncertainty, a variable ratio schedule, the most compulsive payout structure ever discovered, and a designer who understands supernormal stimuli. What would you build? You'd build exactly what's in your hand. This is not a metaphor, and it is not an accident. In 2012, an anthropologist named Natasha Dow-Schul published Addiction by Design, the result of 15 years studying the machine gambling industry in Las Vegas. She documented, in the designer's own words, how slot machines are engineered to maximize something they call time on device, to pull players into what one gambler described as the machine zone, a state in which you keep playing, she wrote, not to win, but simply to keep playing. The reward stops being the goal. The motion becomes the goal. The people who designed your apps studied this world, and they will tell you so themselves. Tristan Harris, who was a design ethicist at Google before he began warning the world about his own industry, put it plainly. Every time I check my phone, I'm playing the slot machine to see what I got. That little bar that spins when you pull a feed down to refresh, that pause, that maybe, is a slot machine handle. Harris called the whole attention economy a race to the bottom of the brainstem. Even the bottomlessness was a choice. The infinite scroll, the feed that never reaches an end, never gives you a natural place to stop, was invented around 2006 by an engineer named Asa Raskin. He has spent years since trying to undo it, estimating that infinite scroll alone burns through something like 200,000 human lifetimes of attention, every single day. And the bait in the patch is the oldest lure there is. Each other. In 2016, researchers at UCLA put 32 teenagers inside a brain scanner and showed them an Instagram-style feed. When a teenager saw their own photo marked with a lot of likes, a region deep in the brain lit up. The nucleus accumbens, a core part of the reward circuitry, the same machinery that answers to food and to money. A number under a photo, it turns out, is read by the brain as something close to survival. Because for 300,000 years, being liked by your group was survival. Before you spiral into thinking a machine has quietly stolen your mind, though, be fair to the evidence, because a channel that lies to you to frighten you isn't worth your evening. The honest picture is messier than the panic. When researchers in Copenhagen followed more than 800 young adults over time, nighttime phone use did not robustly predict getting more depressed. Reviews of the data keep landing in the same place. The effects are real, but modest. They vary enormously from one person to the next, and the headline that phones broke a generation runs well ahead of what the science can actually show. The pull is engineered. That part is not in doubt. But it's a pull, not a curse. And the difference between those two words is the whole rest of this story. Now I can tell you the thing I promised at the start. The fact almost nobody mentions. The one that changes how all of this feels. Go back to dopamine. We said it isn't the pleasure chemical, it's the anticipation chemical. Two researchers at the University of Michigan, Kent Berridge and Terry Robinson, spent decades teasing those two things apart. And what they found is one of the quietly devastating facts about the human mind. The brain's system for wanting something is physically separate from its system for liking it. They can be pulled apart. You can want what you do not like. The brain circuitry that mediates the psychological process of wanting a particular reward, they wrote, is dissociable from circuitry that mediates the degree to which it is liked. Dopamine drives the wanting. The liking, the actual pleasure, runs on a different, smaller, far more fragile system that dopamine barely touches. Sit with what that means for the phone. The reason you can scroll for 40 minutes and feel worse, not better, emptier, more restless, faintly numb, is not that you're doing it wrong. It's that the machine was built to operate your wanting system. And your wanting system doesn't care whether you're enjoying yourself. It never did. It was only ever about, go look, it might be there. The feed keeps the maybe alive forever. So the wanting never resolves. And you keep reaching for a glass rectangle that stopped giving you pleasure a long time ago. That's the twist. You are not a pleasure addict, weak for the next hit. You are a forager who can't find the edge of the patch, because someone made sure there isn't one. And here is where the guilt is supposed to arrive. I want you to set it down. Everything I've described, the foraging drive, the dopamine that fires on uncertainty, the pull of a number beneath your photo, none of it is damage. It is the equipment that kept every one of your ancestors alive long enough to become your ancestor. The evolutionary psychiatrist Randolph Nesse has spent his career making exactly this point, that so much of what we rush to pathologize is not a defect in the person, but a mismatch between an ancient mind and a modern world. Evolved machinery working perfectly in an environment it was never designed for. Harvard's Daniel Lieberman calls these mismatch diseases, old genes meeting new conditions. Barrett puts it most simply of all. These are ordinary instincts in an extraordinary environment. You are not broken. You are running 300,000-year-old software beautifully on hardware it was never meant to touch. And once you can see the machine clearly, you can stop fighting it with the one tool that was always going to lose, raw willpower, and start changing its settings instead. Because the machine's power source is uncertainty. So take the uncertainty away. Researchers at the University of North Dakota had people switch their phones to grayscale, no color, no candy, and watched daily use fall by nearly 40 minutes, with lower anxiety along with it. A team led by Kostadin Kushlev found that simply batching your notifications, letting them arrive at a few set times a day instead of whenever the machine decides to twitch, left people calmer, more focused, more in control of their own attention. And notice this. In that same study, the people who deleted everything and went cold turkey did worse, more anxious, not less, gnawed at by the fear of missing out. Brute abstinence fails for the very same reason the pull exists. You cannot out-discipline a slot machine. But you can turn it back into a vending machine, predictable, boring, a thing you use instead of a thing that uses you. So tonight, when the room goes dark and your hand drifts across the nightstand on its own, and it will. More than 2/3 of us now sleep within reach of the glass. Try, just for a second, to feel what's really happening. That isn't a bad habit. That's a forager, 300,000 years deep, scanning the dark for the patch, reaching out into an uncertain world to see what it might find. The same reach that once found berries on a far hill, water after a dry week, a face in the firelight that meant you were not alone. The hill is gone now, and the machine knows the reach is still there. So it built you a hill that never empties and called it a feed. And it will keep you reaching until morning if you let it. You can't unlearn the reach. It's the most human thing about you. But you can decide, a little more often, what you let it find on the other side of the